My name is Hannah. I'm 28 years old and just yesterday, I became a millionaire. But the moment I inherited everything from my aunt, the parents who abandoned me suddenly showed up. And trust me, they didn't come back for love. They came back for money. Before everything fell apart, my life felt normal. I lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment with my parents. My dad, Mark, worked as a sales manager at a car dealership. My mom, Linda, was a 3rd-grade teacher at the local elementary school. We weren't rich, not even close, but we had enough to get by. Fridays were always movie nights. We'd sit together on the couch, eat microwave popcorn, and laugh at the same old comedies. Summers meant camping trips in a second-hand tent that always smelled a little musty. And Christmas mornings, those were the best. Hot chocolate, cinnamon rolls, and the excitement of opening a few small gifts. As a kid, I thought life was good, safe, normal. But looking back now, I realized there were cracks forming, cracks I was too young to see. The fights started quietly. At first, they were just whispers behind closed doors. Arguments I wasn't supposed to hear. Then came the phone calls my dad always took outside. He'd lower his voice, but I could still catch words: money late, just one more chance. He started working overtime more often, but instead of smelling like car polish when he got home, he smelled like smoke and alcohol. See, my dad liked to play poker. At first it seemed harmless, a game with friends, a way to relax. But it wasn't just a game. Soon weekends disappeared to Atlantic City, where he gambled away money we didn't have. I'll never forget one night. I woke up to the sound of my mom crying in the kitchen. She was begging him to stop before we lost everything. He promised her he would. But promises to my dad were like loose change. Easy to give away and just as easy to forget. My mom started changing too. Her bright smile faded. Her laugh gone. She started calling in sick to work more and more, spending entire days in bed with the curtains shut tight. Sometimes the fridge was nearly empty. When I asked if we could buy groceries, she would snap at me. "Make do with what we have," she'd say, her voice sharp and tired. Other times she'd just stare at me for a long time like she was memorizing my face. Then suddenly tears would roll down her cheeks, and she'd lock herself in the bathroom. I was just a kid, but I thought maybe if I worked harder, I could fix it. So I tried to be perfect. I kept my grades up. I cleaned the apartment without being asked. I wore the same clothes until they were threadbare. I didn't complain. I thought, if I could be good enough, maybe everything would go back to how it used to be. But no matter what I did, it only got worse. The day my life shattered was a Tuesday in October. The air was colder than usual, even for fall. I woke up late, which was strange, because my mom always reminded me to get ready for school. The apartment felt different that morning. Too quiet. Too empty. Their bedroom door was wide open. That never happened. The closet doors gaped open too, half the hangers empty. The dresser drawers were pulled out, only a few socks left behind. And then I saw it. On the kitchen counter. A single sheet of paper in my mother's handwriting. It read, "Hannah, we cannot do this anymore. Your Aunt Margaret will take care of you. We are sorry." 16 words. That was all it took to erase 13 years of my life with them. I froze. My hands shook as I picked up the note. I called my mom's phone over and over again. No answer. I tried my dad's number. Disconnected. I searched the apartment for anything, a hidden address book, an emergency contact, a clue. But there was nothing. It was like they had vanished into thin air. That first night, I stayed in the apartment by myself. I was terrified that if I told someone, they'd put me in foster care. What if my parents came back and I wasn't there anymore? So I ate cereal for dinner and curled up on the living room couch, waiting by the phone. I cried until I fell asleep. The phone never rang. On the second day, our landlord came knocking. He wanted rent money. When I told him my parents were away, he gave me a suspicious look. "If they don't come back soon," he said, "I'll have to call social services." By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my school counselor everything. She called Child Protective Services. That's how Miss Dawson, a social worker, entered my life. She had kind eyes and a calm voice that made me feel a little safer. She pulled strings, made phone calls, and somehow managed to track down Aunt Margaret. I heard her say on the phone, "Your niece has been abandoned. It's either you or foster care." The next morning, a black car pulled up outside my rundown apartment building. And out stepped Aunt Margaret. She looked sharp in her gray suit, her pearls shining even in the dull morning light. Her silver hair was pulled back tight, her expression unreadable. When she saw me, her face didn't soften. She didn't hug me, didn't comfort me. She simply said, "Pack only what you can carry. The rest can be sent later." Her voice was clipped but not cruel. I packed one small suitcase with clothes, stuffed my backpack with photo albums and books. That was it. That was all I had left of my childhood. The social workers handled the paperwork while I stood in my empty apartment, looking at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to my bedroom ceiling. It felt like I was leaving behind a piece of myself. The drive to Aunt Margaret's house took 3 hours. She didn't talk much. Every now and then she'd ask if I needed food or a bathroom break. Other than that, it was silence. I stared out the window as my entire world disappeared in the rearview mirror. Moving in with Aunt Margaret wasn't simple. There were court hearings, paperwork, psychological evaluations. The system wanted to be sure this was the right placement. Through it all, Aunt Margaret never wavered. She hired the best lawyers, answered every question firmly, and made it clear she was committed. Not once did she suggest sending me somewhere else. My parents? They never showed up. The court tried to contact them, but it was like they vanished off the face of the earth. I spent years wondering if they'd ever come back. When I finally moved into Aunt Margaret's home, it felt like stepping into another world. Her house was massive, a Victorian mansion surrounded by iron gates and perfectly trimmed lawns. My new bedroom was bigger than our old apartment. Velvet curtains, an antique 4-poster bed. It was like walking into a movie, but it wasn't a fairy tale. Aunt Margaret ran her house with strict rules. Breakfast at 7 sharp. Beds made before school. Shoes never on the hardwood floors. 1 hour of piano practice every day, even though I had no talent for it. Homework done at a desk, never on the couch or bed. Dinner conversation had to include at least one current event and one personal achievement. No TV on school nights. And every single rule was enforced. First, I broke them all. Maybe part of me wanted her to send me away so I wouldn't risk being abandoned again. But she never did. She enforced consequences, logical ones, not cruel punishments. Late for breakfast? No breakfast. Homework undone? No weekend plans. It was tough, but it was consistent. And that was something I'd never had before. Living with Aunt Margaret was like stepping into another universe. I went from a small 2-bedroom apartment filled with chaos to a giant Victorian mansion ruled by strict order. First, I hated it. The rules felt suffocating. 7 a.m. sharp for breakfast, no excuses. Homework always at a desk, never sprawled out on the couch. Shoes were forbidden on the polished wooden floors. And every night at dinner, I was expected to share one personal achievement and one piece of current news. I was 13, confused, heartbroken, and angry. So I rebelled. I stayed in bed past 7. I left my homework unfinished. I forgot the piano practice she insisted on, even though I was terrible at it. Part of me wanted to test her, to see if she'd get rid of me like my parents did, because deep down I believed everyone left eventually. But Margaret didn't throw me out. She didn't scream. She didn't hit me. Instead, she gave logical consequences. If I missed breakfast, I went hungry until lunch. If homework wasn't done, weekend plans were canceled. If I broke a rule, there was a calm explanation and a consistent response. It wasn't warm. It wasn't soft. But it was steady. And that steadiness began to feel like something I could trust. Aunt Margaret wasn't the type to say, "I love you." In fact, I can't remember her ever saying those words. But sometimes she showed care in small, quiet ways. One night, I found an old wedding photo of my parents. I couldn't stop crying. Instead of scolding me for dwelling on the past, she walked in, handed me a handkerchief, and sat silently beside me until the tears ran out. Another time, I failed a math test after studying for hours. I expected harsh criticism, but instead she hired a tutor. No lecture, no shaming, just a solution. It was moments like those that confused me. She wasn't soft or affectionate, but she was dependable, and I realized that was a different kind of love. Margaret wasn't just strict at home. She was a force in the business world. She had inherited a small houseware store from our grandparents years earlier. Instead of letting it fade away, she turned it into a thriving chain of high-end home decor shops across 3 states. She worked long hours but always came home for dinner. Often, she'd bring paperwork to the table and keep working afterward. On weekends, she sometimes took me along to meetings. Watch closely, she'd whisper. Notice who speaks first, who makes concessions, who holds eye contact. Business is human psychology applied to commerce. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I listened, and I learned. Margaret believed education was the key to everything. When she decided the local public school wasn't good enough, she enrolled me in Westfield Academy, a private school filled with kids from wealthy families. Walking into that place was like landing on another planet. The kids wore designer clothes. They talked about summer homes and ski trips. They had tutors, coaches, and private music lessons. I felt like an outsider the moment I stepped in. Academically, I was behind too. My old school hadn't prepared me for the heavy workload and high expectations. I spent hours at my desk trying to keep up. Some nights I cried, convinced I would never belong. Once, after a particularly brutal night with geometry proofs, I broke down completely. Margaret came into my room, arms crossed. She didn't comfort me the way I secretly wanted. Instead, she said, "Your circumstances changed without your choice. But how you respond, that's entirely up to you. You can waste this chance or you can use it. I don't invest in lost causes." Her words were blunt. They stung. But somehow they steadied me. I started working harder. I used my allowance to hire a peer tutor. I formed study groups with classmates. By junior year, I had pulled myself up onto the honor roll. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. And though Margaret never gushed about it, I caught something in her eyes the day she saw my report card. A flicker of pride. That flicker meant everything. When it came time for college applications, Margaret and I had our biggest fight. I wanted to attend the state university where some of my friends were going. She wanted me to aim higher, schools with bigger names and tougher programs. "You're thinking about comfort," she told me. "You need to think strategically about your future." I snapped. "I never asked to be your project." Her voice was cool when she answered. "And I never asked to be your guardian. Yet here we are. I'm trying to give you the opportunities your parents never had." The room went silent. And for the first time, she opened up. She told me about my father, her younger brother. "He was brilliant," she said softly. "He could solve math problems in his head like magic. But our parents couldn't afford to send him to college. He worked at a gas station while I got a scholarship. He resented me for years. Gambling became his escape. Your mother, she was bright too, but trapped by circumstances. I'm trying to break that cycle for you." It was the first time she had spoken about my parents without anger or judgment, and it gave me a glimpse of why she pushed me so hard. I ended up applying to 7 schools. I was accepted into 5. In the end, I chose Northwood University, a prestigious school where I could study business and marketing. Margaret paid the tuition without complaint, even though it was expensive. And with that, my life moved to the next chapter. College gave me freedom I had never known. I joined clubs, made new friends, and discovered talents I didn't know I had. I found I had a knack for design and strategy, skills that complemented the financial discipline Margaret had drilled into me. Every summer, I interned at her company. I learned inventory management, vendor relations, marketing campaigns, and something else happened during those years. Our relationship shifted. The distance between us made it easier to connect. Our Sunday phone calls were less formal. Sometimes we even laughed. When I graduated with honors, I saw pride in her eyes again. She didn't hug me. She didn't say, "I love you." But she shook my hand firmly and nodded once. And somehow that felt just as powerful. After graduation, I moved back into her house. I became the marketing director for her company. We developed a rhythm. 2 independent women sharing space. She still worked long hours, but we shared dinners and conversations. I dated occasionally, but Margaret had a way of discouraging anything that might distract me from my career. At the time, I didn't mind, because for the first time in my life, I felt stable. Then, 2 years ago, everything changed again. Margaret was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim. She faced it the way she faced everything: calm, disciplined, practical. "We all die," she told me. "The only variable is how we use the time before that happens." She kept working as long as she could, slowly handing responsibilities over to me. And as her body grew weaker, something in her softened. One night, as I helped her into bed, she squeezed my hand. You were the daughter I never allowed myself to have, she whispered. Taking you in was the best decision of my life. That was the closest she ever came to saying she loved me, and it was enough. She passed away 8 months later, peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was small, mostly business associates and a few distant relatives. I stood at her graveside and realized she had become my true parent in every way that mattered. The grief was heavy. The house felt empty. I caught myself listening for her footsteps, saving articles I thought she'd enjoy. But I kept running the business as she had taught me, because that was how I could honor her. I never expected what was coming next, because 3 weeks later, at the reading of her will, the ghosts of my past came walking back into my life. 3 weeks after Aunt Margaret's funeral, I got a formal letter in the mail. It was from Mr. Harold Carter, her attorney for more than 30 years. The letter said her will would be read the following Tuesday, 10 a.m., at his downtown office. It also said all interested parties would be present. I didn't think much of that line. I assumed it meant maybe some business partners, maybe her housekeeper, maybe a few charities. I was wrong. The morning of the will reading, I dressed carefully. A navy blue suit. Nothing flashy but professional. It was exactly the kind of outfit Aunt Margaret would have approved of. I arrived 15 minutes early. Mr. Carter's office smelled like leather and old books. Dark wood everywhere. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with legal documents. He greeted me warmly, offered condolences again, and said we were waiting for a few others. I sat down in one of the leather chairs, trying to calm myself. I picked up a magazine, flipped through the pages, but didn't take in a single word. Then the door opened, and when I looked up I froze. Standing in the doorway were two people I never thought I'd see again. My parents. My father, Mark, looked so much older. His thick dark hair was now thin and completely gray. His shoulders slumped forward, as if life itself had weighed him down. He had gained weight too, at least 50 pounds. My mother, Linda, looked different as well. Her blonde hair was cut short, in a style that didn't flatter her thin, tired face. Her eyes had dark circles under them. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. I stood up without meaning to. My legs felt shaky. "Hon," my father said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "Look at you. All grown up." My mother stepped forward, her arms outstretched. Before I could move, she wrapped me in a hug. I stood stiffly, my arms at my sides. Her perfume was familiar but foreign at the same time. When she finally pulled back, she looked me up and down. "We've been trying to find you," she said softly. "You look so much like your aunt now. So sophisticated." My throat felt tight. How did you know about this?" I asked. "We saw the obituary in the paper," my father said, giving me a sad smile. "We've been keeping tabs on the family from afar. We knew you were with Margaret." Of course, they had always known. They knew where I was. And yet, for 15 years, not once had they reached out. The room tilted slightly, as though I might pass out. "Please sit down," Mr. Carter said gently, gesturing toward the chairs. A moment later, another woman entered, Mrs. Bentley, Margaret's longtime housekeeper. She'd worked for her for over 20 years and had always been kind to me in her own quiet way. She gave me a sympathetic nod and sat near the window, as far from my parents as possible. We all waited in silence until Mr. Carter finally cleared his throat and opened a thick folder. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Margaret Evelyn Hughes," he began formally. My parents leaned forward almost imperceptibly, but I noticed. It was then I realized they weren't here for closure. They weren't here to reconnect. They were here for money. Mr. Carter adjusted his glasses. "To my niece, Hannah Marie Collins, I leave the entirety of my estate. This includes, but is not limited to, the property at 347 Lakeview Drive, its contents, and the surrounding 2 acres of land. My full ownership share of Hughes Home Collections, valued at approximately $12 million. All bank accounts, investment portfolios, and retirement funds, totaling approximately $2 million in liquid assets. My personal effects, including jewelry, artwork, automobiles, and all intellectual property related to my business ventures." The room fell silent. I had known Margaret was successful, but I hadn't realized just how wealthy she truly was. My father coughed lightly, then asked, "Excuse me, Mr. Carter, is there anything else?" "There are smaller bequests," Carter said, nodding toward Mrs. Bentley. as well as charitable donations to be made annually from the business profits. But the bulk of the estate passes to Hannah, as stated. My mother smiled, but it was tight, almost forced. Well, she said, patting my hand, that's quite a responsibility for someone so young. Fortunately, as her parents, we can help. I stiffened. Legally speaking, my father added casually, since Hannah was a minor when Margaret took her in, and our parental rights were never formally terminated, we remain her legal guardians. We'd be happy to assist in managing these assets until Hannah gains more life experience. The panic that shot through me was immediate. 15 years of silence, and now they wanted to control everything. I opened my mouth to object, but Mr. Carter spoke first. I believe there is some confusion about the legal status, he said calmly. Perhaps we should reconvene tomorrow after I gather the relevant documents. Say 2 o'clock. My parents exchanged a quick glance before nodding. That would be fine, my father said. We're staying at the Westmont Hotel. Hannah, maybe you can meet us for lunch tomorrow? Catch up properly. Before I could answer, Carter stood. If you'll excuse us, I need a few moments with Hannah to discuss confidential matters. My parents hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave without securing their position. We'll see you tomorrow then, sweetheart, my mother said, leaning in for another hug I couldn't return. We have so much to talk about. My father slipped me a business card with their cell phone numbers written on the back. Call anytime. We've got 15 years to make up for. The door had barely closed when I collapsed into my chair, my hands shaking. They can't really have any legal claim, can they? I asked Mr. Carter. His expression was grim. I think you should prepare yourself for a difficult conversation tomorrow, he said. Your aunt anticipated this possibility, but I'll need time to organize her contingency plans. Mrs. Bentley came over and gently squeezed my shoulder. Your aunt was a wise woman, she said softly. Trust that she wouldn't leave you unprotected. I nodded, but inside my heart was pounding. For years I had fantasized about my parents returning, but now that they had, all I felt was dread. Despite my better judgment, I agreed to meet them for dinner that evening. Mr. Carter had advised against it, but a part of me needed answers only they could give. I chose a public place, an upscale Italian restaurant Margaret had often used for business meetings. They were already seated when I arrived. My father stood to pull out my chair, all exaggerated politeness. My mother had reapplied her makeup and styled her hair, trying to look more like the woman I remembered. As soon as I sat down, my father smiled. We ordered a bottle of Pinot Noir. I remember your mother always loved it. I don't drink wine, I said firmly, ordering water instead. It was a small thing, but it felt important. A way to show them I wasn't the child they left behind. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation was awkward small talk. They asked about my education, my job, my friends. I gave short, careful answers, studying them for any glimpse of the parents I used to love. Finally, my mother sighed. We owe you an explanation, she said, reaching for my hand across the table. I kept my hands in my lap. What we did was wrong, my father said quickly. We know that. But we were in a terrible place. I had gambling debts, serious ones. Dangerous people were involved. And your mother, she was battling severe depression. My mother nodded. We convinced ourselves you'd be better off with Margaret. She had money, stability. We had nothing to give you but chaos. I looked at them both. You had yourselves, I whispered. That's all I wanted. My father's eyes dropped to his plate. I got help. I've been clean 8 years now. Your mother found the right medication. We've built a modest, stable life. We thought about reaching out so many times, but we were ashamed. And the longer it went on, the harder it was to face you. They exchanged a glance, then my father added, We did check on you though. We called social services 6 months after we left. They told us you were with family. Every few years we checked again. I clenched my jaw. So they had known where I was. They had reassured themselves just enough to live with their decision, but never once actually reached out. We regret our decision every day, my mother said, tears pooling in her eyes. Seeing you now successful, beautiful. It breaks my heart we missed watching you grow up. The waiter arrived with our entrees, giving me a moment to breathe. When he left, my father leaned forward. Margaret did well by you, better than we could have. And now she's left you set for life. My mother smiled, but her words were casual. Too casual. The house alone must be worth $2 million in today's market. And the business, well, that's overwhelming for someone your age. I've been helping run the business for years, I said flatly. Of course you have, my father said smoothly. But there's a difference between helping and having full responsibility. Legal issues, taxes, investments, those things are complicated. My mother nodded. Estate taxes can be crushing without guidance. We just want to help. After all, we're your parents. And just like that, the real reason for their return came shining through. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But as the dinner went on, the pattern became clear. My parents weren't just back to make amends. They were circling around the one thing they truly wanted. Money. My father twirled pasta on his fork, speaking in that same smooth salesman voice I remembered from childhood. Margaret left you a lot, he said, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. A house worth millions. A business worth even more. That's a lot for someone your age. I didn't reply. My mother leaned forward, her eyes shining in the candlelight. Sweetheart, we could help. Estate taxes alone could eat you alive if you're not careful. I've been running the business for years, I reminded them flatly. My father smiled as though humoring me. Of course you have. But there's a big difference between helping and having full responsibility. That's why you need guidance. People who understand, who've been through struggles themselves. His words were smooth, but I caught the cracks in between. This wasn't about helping me. It was about securing a way back into my life and my bank account. Finally, my mother sighed dramatically, as though the weight of the world were on her shoulders. We're not asking for anything, Hannah, she said softly. We just want to be part of your life again, to help if we can. But, she hesitated, glancing at my father, if you wanted to help us, it would mean so much. My stomach dropped. There it was. How much? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. They both blinked, startled. Well, my father said quickly, our condo in Phoenix has a second mortgage. $70,000 would clear it completely. That would give us a fresh start. And my medical bills, my mother added, wringing her hands. Another $30,000 would cover those. So yes, $100,000 would change everything for us. I sat back in my chair, the truth settling like a stone in my stomach. So that was it. 15 years of silence. One dinner together. And they had already put a price tag on my forgiveness. I looked at them both, my voice cold. And what about my problems? I asked. What about the nightmares I had for years? The therapy bills? The birthdays I spent alone? What's the price tag for those? My mother's eyes filled with tears. We know money can't undo the emotional damage, she whispered. We just want to be a family again. A family that starts with a cash transaction? I asked bitterly. My father's face hardened slightly, though he kept his voice calm. You have to understand, Hannah. We made mistakes. But that fortune, it came from our family originally. Margaret only had it because of what our parents left her. It's only fair that we're included. Fair. I repeated, my voice rising. You abandoned me at 13. You left me with nothing but a note. And now you think you're entitled to a share of her fortune. My father leaned in, lowering his voice. We're your parents. Blood means something. I thought of Margaret then. Strict, distant, unsentimental Margaret. The woman who had never once said she loved me, but who showed up every single day of my life since the moment they walked away. Yes, I said quietly. Blood means something, but actions mean more. The rest of dinner was more of the same. They swung back and forth between emotional guilt trips and subtle financial hints. By dessert, they had suggested not only paying off their debts, but maybe giving them roles at the company. Generous salaries, of course, my father said smoothly. We could really take some of the weight off your shoulders. When we finally walked outside, my mother hugged me again, whispering in my ear, think about what family really means, sweetheart. Everyone makes mistakes. I drove home that night in a fog. My head pounded. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like if they came back. I had written imaginary letters to them. I had pictured us sitting down, crying, reconciling. But now that it was real, all I felt was used. When I got home, there was a message waiting on my answering machine. Miss Collins, this is Sandra Kelly. I used to work with your parents years ago at First National Bank. I saw their names connected to your aunt's obituary, and I felt I had to reach out. Please call me before you make any agreements with them. There are things you should know." Her voice was serious, urgent. I replayed it 3 times, my heart racing. What did she know? That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in Margaret's study, surrounded by her neatly organized files. For the first time since her death, I opened the locked drawer in her desk. Inside was a folder labeled simply Collins. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside were reports, documents, photographs. Margaret had kept records, not just of me but of my parents, and what I read inside made my blood run cold. I sat in Aunt Margaret's study until 3 in the morning, the folder spread open on the desk in front of me. Inside was a history of my parents I had never known. Bank statements, court documents, reports from private investigators, even photographs. Margaret had tracked them for years. At first, my heart ached as I flipped through the pages. But as I read more, that ache turned into anger, because what I discovered was far worse than I ever imagined. There was evidence that 6 months after I moved in with Margaret, my father had contacted her. He demanded $50,000 in exchange for not fighting the guardianship in court. She paid him, not because she wanted to, but because she feared a custody battle would traumatize me further. 3 years later, he came back asking for more, claiming his gambling debts put him in danger. She refused. Instead, she hired security for the house. There was a report about my mother too. When I was 16, she called saying she had cancer and needed treatment money. But Margaret's investigator discovered it was a lie. Even when I got into college, they tried again, asking for tuition money in exchange for rebuilding the relationship. Margaret blocked them every time. At the bottom of the file was a sealed envelope. My name was written across it in Margaret's careful handwriting. Hands trembling, I opened it. Inside was a letter. "My dearest Hannah, if you are reading this, then I am gone and your parents have reappeared. This is not a coincidence. Over the years, they have tried to use you as leverage to extract money from me. I never told you because I wanted you to heal without the weight of their betrayals. But now you must know the truth. They may use guilt, threats, or false affection. Do not be fooled. I have left all necessary documents with Mr. Carter to protect you. And there is one final truth you must know. When you were 16, I formally adopted you. You are, in every legal sense, my daughter. Your parents have no claim to you or your inheritance. Whatever you decide about them emotionally is your choice. But financially, you are safe. Remember, family is not DNA. It is shown through consistent care and sacrifice. And in that, you have always been mine." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I whispered the last line aloud. Family is not DNA. It's who shows up. The next afternoon, I returned to Mr. Carter's office. My parents were already there. But this time they weren't alone. A thin man with slicked back hair introduced himself as Gerald Hoffman, their attorney. "Just a precaution," my father explained smoothly. "Legal matters can get complicated." The room felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Mr. Carter entered, carrying several thick files and a laptop. He sat behind his desk, but his calm presence felt more like a shield than a barrier. "Before we begin," he said, "I should clarify my role. I was Margaret's attorney for over 30 years. I am also the executor of her estate, and through provisions she made, I represent Hannah as well." I saw Hoffman's jaw tighten, but he nodded politely. "My clients," Hoffman began smoothly, "are concerned about their daughter's sudden inheritance of such large assets. As her legal guardians, they simply want to ensure proper management." "Guardians," I repeated, my voice trembling. "Yes," my father said quickly. "The court never officially terminated our rights. Margaret only had temporary guardianship." I clenched my fists under the table. 15 years of nothing, and now they were clinging to technicalities. Mr. Carter adjusted his glasses. "There seems to be some confusion," he said calmly. "Allow me to clarify the history." He opened the first file. When Hannah came into Margaret's care, temporary guardianship was indeed established. Social services made multiple attempts to contact you regarding permanent arrangements. You never responded. "We were moving a lot," my mother interrupted quickly. "We never received anything." "Interesting," Carter said, pulling out another document. Because the court records show someone appeared with affidavits signed by both of you, consenting to the transfer of parental rights. A man named Louis Barker. My parents exchanged a quick glance. We never signed anything, my father snapped. Those must be forgeries. Carter didn't flinch. Margaret suspected the same. That's why she hired a private investigator. He located you both in Nevada. According to his report, Mr. Collins, you were gambling at multiple casinos. Mrs. Collins, you were working as a cocktail waitress in the same establishments. And when asked directly about Hannah, you both confirmed you wanted to terminate your parental rights. The color drained from my mother's face. My father's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Furthermore, Carter continued, pulling out another paper, the investigator documented a payment of $15,000 from Louis Barker to Mr. Collins the day after those affidavits were filed. That was an unrelated business transaction, my father shouted. Of course, Carter said smoothly, not even looking up. He reached for another envelope. And finally, Margaret requested this letter be read in the event of such a dispute. He handed it to me. It was the same letter I had read last night. I unfolded it, my voice steadier than I expected. My dearest Hannah, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and your parents have reappeared. I read every word aloud. I wanted them to hear it. Every lie exposed. Every truth laid bare. When I reached the line, you are legally my daughter, my mother let out a soft cry. My father shook his head. His face twisted with anger. This is ridiculous. She poisoned you against us, paid us off and stole our child. No, I said, my voice rising for the first time. You gave me up. You took money to walk away. And she stepped in to save me. Carter closed the folder. Additionally, the will contains a clause. Any attempt to legally challenge these arrangements will result in the entire estate being transferred to a charitable foundation. Hannah would receive nothing. Neither would you. The silence in the room was deafening. Their attorney leaned in to whisper something to my father. My father's face darkened, his voice low but furious. This isn't over. We still have rights. I looked at him, my heart pounding. No, I said quietly. You had rights. 15 years ago. And you sold them. The meeting ended with my father's furious words still echoing in my head. This isn't over, he had said, his face red with anger. Mr. Carter pressed a button on his desk, and 2 security officers escorted my parents and their lawyer out of the office. When the door closed, silence filled the room. I sat frozen, my heart pounding in my ears. For 15 years I had imagined this moment, my parents finally coming back, explaining everything. In my fantasies it was always a reunion. Tears, apologies, forgiveness. But now reality felt nothing like my dreams. They hadn't come back for me. They had come back for money. Mr. Carter moved from behind his desk and sat beside me, his voice calm. You should know something, he said gently. Margaret asked me to be your godfather when she adopted you. I promised her I would continue looking out for you after she was gone. Tears filled my eyes. Why didn't she ever tell me about the adoption? Or about you being my godfather? She worried you might feel she was trying to replace your parents, he explained. She wanted you to form your own opinions about family. She didn't want to force the word mother on you. I nodded slowly, my throat tight. She influenced me more than anyone, I admitted, even without saying it. He gave me a small smile. And she was proud of you, more than you'll ever know. Given your parents' history, Carter continued, we can file restraining orders. A judge will likely approve, considering their past attempts to extort Margaret. Yes, I whispered. Do it. Because in that moment, I knew I couldn't let them worm their way back into my life. Not again. That evening I was in Margaret's. No, my house, cooking dinner when I saw headlights sweep across the driveway. My chest tightened. It was them. My parents. They rang the doorbell over and over until I finally opened it. You can't be here, I said firmly. A restraining order is being filed. We're still your parents, my father barked. You owe us the decency of a conversation without lawyers and security guards. I owe you nothing, I replied evenly. But I'll give you 5 minutes. Then you leave or I call the police. My mother pushed past me into the foyer, her eyes darting around the mansion. So this is where you've been living, she said, almost to herself. Her tone was sharp, jealous. My father followed, ignoring my warning. We just want to understand why you're being so cold, my mother said. We made mistakes, but we're trying to make amends. By trying to take control of my inheritance? I asked. That's your idea of making amends? That woman poisoned you against us, my father shouted. She always resented me. She used you to hurt me. Margaret saved me, I snapped back. She gave me stability, education, respect. She showed me love through actions, not empty promises. My mother's voice trembled. We loved you, Hannah. We were sick. Depression is real. Gambling is an addiction. We needed help, not judgment. I felt my voice break. I was 13 years old. I needed parents, not excuses. Do you know what it was like to wake up and find you gone? To wait by the phone for days, hoping you'd call? To check the mailbox every day for months, praying for a birthday card, a letter, anything. My father looked away, shame flickering across his face. We thought about you every day, my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. Thoughts without actions are meaningless, I said coldly. Margaret never once told me she loved me. Not once. But she showed up. Every single day. We're here now, my father said, softening his voice into that familiar salesman's tone. We can build a relationship going forward. Support each other. Be a family again. You're here now because Margaret died wealthy, I shot back. If she had died poor, would you even bother? They stayed silent. And their silence told me everything. Mr. Carter showed me the investigators' reports, I continued. You knew where I was for 15 years. You chose not to contact me until there was money involved. That's not fair, my mother protested weakly. We were ashamed. We didn't know how to face you. And yet you found the courage the moment you heard about millions of dollars, I said bitterly. My father's face hardened. You have no idea what we've been through. Living in poverty, while my sister enjoyed wealth that should have been shared with family. Margaret built that wealth herself, I countered. She worked 16-hour days for decades. What exactly did you contribute? I'm her brother, he shouted. And your father. Biology isn't an entitlement program, I snapped. You don't get to abandon me and then come back expecting rewards. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing dramatically. How did you become so heartless? This isn't how we raised you. You didn't raise me, I said firmly. You left before the job was done. Margaret finished it. As the shouting echoed, flashing lights appeared outside. A police car pulled into the driveway. I had asked Carter to arrange periodic checks on the house, knowing this confrontation was inevitable. That will be the police, I told them. You should leave. My father grabbed my arm roughly. This isn't over. We can make your life very difficult. We can spread stories about Margaret, tarnish her reputation. I pulled away, pointing to the security camera in the corner of the foyer. Every word you say is being recorded. Margaret installed those years ago. Keep talking and you'll regret it. His face paled as the reality sank in. Come on, he muttered to my mother. She's not worth it. As they walked toward the door, my mother turned back one last time. You'll regret this. One day you'll realize money can't comfort you. Family is everything. I stared at her, my voice steady. I agree. Family is everything. But family is who shows up. And you didn't. They left as the police officer stopped them in the driveway. I sank to the floor, the adrenaline finally draining from my body. For 15 years I had carried a wound that never healed, waiting for an explanation. Now I had my answer. And though it hurt, it also set me free. The morning after my parents showed up at the house, Mr. Carter called. The judge approved it, he said firmly. The restraining order is official. Your parents can't come within 200 feet of you, your home, or the business. I let out a shaky breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. For the first time since their return, I felt a sliver of safety. Not peace. Not yet. But safety. That night, though, the house felt heavier than ever. I walked through the halls, my footsteps echoing on polished hardwood. Everywhere I looked, there were traces of Margaret, her books, her artwork, the faint smell of her perfume still lingering in her bedroom. It was comforting and crushing at the same time, because even though I had legal protection, I still felt like that 13-year-old girl again, waiting for someone to show up and take care of me. But Margaret was gone. And my parents had proven once and for all, they weren't coming back for love. The next afternoon, Mrs. Bentley, Margaret's longtime housekeeper, stopped by. I was cleaning out one of the storage rooms, she said gently. I found something I think she meant for you. It was a small wooden box, plain, but with Margaret's initials carved into the lid. Inside were photographs, jewelry, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. My heart raced as I unfolded the letter. My Hannah, if you found this, it means you've already read my first letter and seen the truth about your parents. But there are things I could not bring myself to say while I was alive. Things you deserve to know now. When I took you in, I wasn't sure I could be what you needed. I had spent my whole life building walls, protecting myself through discipline and work. But you changed me. You softened me even if I didn't always show it. Every day I admired your resilience. The way you tried to be strong even when you were breaking inside. You reminded me of myself at that age, only braver. I know I wasn't warm. I know I wasn't easy to love. But Hannah, I loved you fiercely. I was proud of you in ways words could never capture. And though I never said it, you became the daughter I never had. By the time I reached the last line, tears blurred the page. If you carry nothing else from me, carry this. You are not abandoned. You are chosen. You are loved. I pressed the letter to my chest, sobbing quietly in the empty room. For so long, I had wondered if Margaret saw me as a burden. Now I knew the truth. A week later, I walked into Hughes Home Collections, the company Margaret had built from scratch. Employees greeted me warmly. Many had known me since I was a teenager, working summers in the office. Mr. Carter met me in Margaret's old office. The desk was cleared, the shelves dusted. It felt strange seeing it without her. Margaret left detailed instructions for the business, he explained. She wanted you to take over as majority owner, but she also knew you'd need help. That's why she appointed a board of trustees to guide you. He handed me a binder thick with notes, projections, and strategies. Margaret had planned everything, down to the smallest detail. She believed in you, he said quietly. That's why she left this legacy in your hands. That night, I sat at the desk with the binder open. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt something other than grief or anger. I felt purpose. She hadn't just given me money. She had given me trust, a chance to create something meaningful. As I read through her notes, one idea stood out, the Hughes Foundation. Margaret had written, when Hannah is ready, she may choose to create a charitable branch of the business. I suggest focusing on children who, like her, have been abandoned or neglected. Let this wealth do what money rarely does, heal. I sat back, stunned. She had seen me. She had known what I needed even before I did. And now she was leaving me with the tools to help others who had lived the same nightmare. The days that followed weren't easy. I still woke up some nights with my parents' voices in my head. I still wondered what it would feel like to have normal parents. But slowly the anger began to dull. Instead of focusing on what I had lost, I began to focus on what I had. A home, a business, a legacy, and most importantly, a truth I could finally believe in. I wasn't unwanted. I had been chosen. One evening, I stood on the balcony of the house, looking out over the lake as the sun dipped low on the horizon. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. I thought about Margaret's words again. You are not abandoned. You are chosen. You are loved. And for the first time in my life, I believed them. 2 months after Margaret's passing, I stood in the main conference room of Hughes Home Collections. Around me sat a dozen board members, business advisors, and longtime employees. On the table lay Margaret's binder, the one filled with her detailed notes. At the top of one page in her neat handwriting were the words, Hannah's Choice. I cleared my throat, nervous but steady. I've been thinking a lot about what Margaret wanted this company to mean. I began. She believed in building not just wealth but stability, not just profit but purpose. And she believed in me. I paused, letting that truth sink in. That's why I've decided to move forward with her vision. We're creating the Hughes Foundation, an outreach program for children and teens who've been abandoned, neglected, or left behind. We're going to provide scholarships, safe housing, and mentorship. Because no child should ever feel like I once did, alone and unwanted. For a moment, the room was silent. Then applause broke out. Some people even stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't just living Margaret's legacy. I was beginning my own. A week later, the foundation launch was announced at a press conference. Reporters filled the lobby. Flashbulbs lit up the room. I stood at the podium, hands gripping the sides, and said the words I had rehearsed in front of the mirror 100 times. This foundation is about hope. It's about telling kids that being abandoned doesn't mean being unloved, that your worth isn't defined by who walks away, but by who chooses to stay. My aunt chose me, and now I choose to stand for others. The cameras clicked furiously. Reporters shouted questions, but I just smiled, feeling for once completely certain of who I was. That certainty didn't last long. 2 days later, as I walked out of the office building, I saw them. My parents. They were standing near the curb waiting. A camera crew hovered nearby, clearly tipped off by someone. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a coincidence. This was their next move. "Hannah!" my mother cried, rushing forward. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the cameras zoomed in. "We just want our daughter back." I froze, blindsided. My father stepped up beside her, his arm around her shoulders as though they were victims in this story. "She's been brainwashed," he told the reporters. "Margaret Hughes poisoned her against her real family. But blood can't be erased. We're her parents and will never stop fighting for her." Microphones were shoved in my face. "Do you have a response, Hannah?" one reporter asked. Every instinct in me screamed to run. But I remembered Margaret's words. Family is not DNA, it's who shows up. So I straightened my shoulders, took a deep breath, and spoke directly into the microphones. "My parents abandoned me when I was 13 years old," I said clearly, my voice echoing off the building walls. "They left me without food, without money, and without answers. My aunt took me in. She raised me. She gave me a future. And she loved me in a way they never did." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters scribbled furiously. My father's face reddened. "That's not true," he shouted. "We were sick, we needed help. And you never once came back to find me," I said, turning to face him directly. "Not when I was crying myself to sleep. Not when I graduated high school. Not when I got into college. You only came back when you realized Margaret left me money." The silence was deafening. Even the reporters seemed stunned. I looked into the cameras, my voice steady. "So let me be clear. They are my biological parents, yes. But my real family was the woman who showed up for me every single day for 15 years. My aunt, Margaret Hughes. And I will honor her by building something good out of what she left me. That's the only family legacy that matters." The next morning, headlines splashed across newspapers and TV screens. Heiress exposes parents' abandonment. Daughter chooses aunt over parents in emotional statement. Public sympathy swung hard in my direction. Donations to the foundation poured in. As for my parents, the backlash was immediate. Former neighbors and acquaintances came forward, confirming they had left me behind. Old police reports resurfaced about my father's gambling and my mother's false claims. Whatever they thought they were going to gain, it backfired completely. That night, I sat alone in the study, Margaret's second letter beside me. For years, I had been haunted by the question, why wasn't I enough for them to stay? But now, I understood. It was never about me. It was about their weakness, their choices, their inability to love anyone more than themselves. And finally, I could let that go. I whispered into the silence of the house, "I forgive you. Not for you, but for me." And with that, the heaviness I had carried since I was 13 finally began to lift. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a framed photo of Margaret, stern-faced as always, but with a glint of warmth in her eyes that only I had learned to see. I touched the frame gently. "I'll make you proud," I promised. 6 months later, the Hughes Foundation was no longer just an idea on paper. It was real. The first scholarship recipients had been chosen. A renovated youth center opened downtown, complete with tutoring rooms, a library, and safe beds for kids who needed them. I walked through the halls one afternoon, watching children laugh, play, and study. A boy about 12 years old caught my eye. He was sitting alone at a desk, clutching a backpack that looked far too worn. I sat down across from him and smiled. "First day here?" I asked. He nodded shyly. "My mom, she left. I don't know if she's coming back." My chest tightened. His words hit me like a mirror to my past. I leaned forward gently. "I know how that feels," I said softly. "But I promise you, you're not alone anymore." His eyes widened as though he wasn't sure if he could believe me. And in that moment I realized this was why Margaret had left me everything. Not so I could live comfortably, but so I could make sure no child ever had to feel what I once did. They moved out of state, bitter but quiet, their reputation in shambles. They tried one more time to contact me, through a letter sent to the foundation's office. I didn't even open it. I handed it to Mr. Carter, who locked it away in the file cabinet with all the other past attempts. 'Cause I finally understood. I didn't need their words anymore. I didn't need their apologies. I had closed that chapter for good. The mansion felt different too. Not empty anymore. I opened it up for small gatherings, board meetings, even charity dinners. The rooms that once echoed with silence now buzzed with conversation and laughter. Mrs. Bentley stayed on as housekeeper, though really, she had become more like family. Some evenings she cooked us both dinner, and we sat at the kitchen table talking about Margaret, laughing at her quirks, crying at the memories, sharing stories that kept her spirit alive. For the first time since her passing, the house didn't feel like a mausoleum. It felt alive again. One morning I looked at myself in the mirror and hardly recognized the woman staring back. I wasn't the abandoned 13-year-old anymore. I wasn't the scared young woman bracing for her parents' return. I was strong. I was steady. And I was finally free. Margaret had given me wealth, yes. But more than that, she had given me the courage to define family on my own terms. And I chose a family of choice, of loyalty, of love. At the Foundation's first annual gala, I stood on stage before hundreds of donors, partners, and families. Behind me, a giant photo of Margaret filled the screen. I took a deep breath and began. When I was 13, I thought my life was over. I thought being abandoned meant I was unworthy of love. But one person proved me wrong. My aunt. She wasn't warm, she wasn't easy, but she showed up every single day. And in doing so, she taught me the greatest lesson of my life. Family is not defined by DNA. Family is defined by who stays, by who fights for you, by who loves you when it's hardest. I looked out over the audience, their faces shining in the soft light. That's what this foundation is about. Giving kids what I was given. The chance to see that their story doesn't end with abandonment. That their future can be brighter than their past. The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. And as I stepped back from the podium, I felt a sense of peace I had never known before. Later that night, after the gala, I stood outside on the balcony of the mansion, the city lights glittering in the distance. I whispered into the night air, as though Margaret could still hear me. I did it, and I'll keep doing it. For you, for me, for every kid who needs it. A soft breeze brushed against my face, almost like a response. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. 'Cause I wasn't. I never had been. Margaret had shown me the truth. And now I carried it forward. Family isn't who leaves. It's who stays. Family isn't blood. It's love. And with that truth, I finally stepped into the future. Whole, free, and unafraid.